So I have to confess something right up front today. And it's slightly embarrassing, actually.
Oh boy. Well, now I absolutely have to know what you did.
Okay, so a few days ago, I decided I was going to do a strict dopamine detox, like the whole 9 yards. I took my phone, I turned it completely off, and I locked it inside my desk drawer.
Wow. Locked it away.
Yeah, I was going to reset my brain, find total inner peace, and finally tackle this massive list of goals I have on that transparent task board in my room.
Right. Because suddenly disconnecting from all stimulation usually goes so peacefully.
Mm.
I am very curious to hear how this experiment actually played out.
Well, the piece lasted for about 12 minutes.
12 minutes. That is pretty specific.
12 minutes exactly, because after 12 minutes, the understimulation hit me so hard, I actually started to panic. I was wandering around my apartment, and I ended up sitting on the bathroom floor, just reading the ingredients on a shampoo bottle,
Wait, really? A shampoo bottle?
just to feel something. Aqua, sodium lauryl sulfate, citric acid. I mean, I was reading it like it was a thriller novel. It was pathetic.
I mean, it is a funny image, but honestly, it highlights something incredibly common. You were completely starving for a hit of stimulation, and your brain just compromised by seeking out literally the only text it could find in the room.
It felt terrible, honestly, and it just made me feel so guilty. I look at my task board every single day. I feel completely paralyzed, and I end up just scrolling on my phone. Then when I try to fix it, I end up reading soap labels.
Yeah, the classic overcorrection.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But figuring out why that happened is actually the exact mission for today's deep dive here on the Inquiry Talks. So, welcome everyone. Today we are looking at a huge stack of fascinating sources about this massive viral trend of dopamine detoxing.
We've got a lot to cover today.
We really do. We are pulling from psychological research, James Clear's best-selling book, Atomic Habits, and the clinical work of Dr. Anna Lemke and Dr. Cameron Sipa.
Yeah.
We want to figure out, is a dopamine detox a real biological solution, or is it just a modern myth?
And more importantly, how do we actually take back our focus in a world that is constantly demanding it?
Right. So to understand why sitting in a quiet room suddenly felt like an actual emergency to my brain, I think we first have to clarify what dopamine actually is. Because almost everything pop culture teaches us about this molecule is basically wrong.
Yeah, slightly off base is putting it mildly. We constantly hear it described purely in terms of reward.
Which is so confusing to me because I have literally always heard it called the pleasure molecule. The story goes, I eat a piece of chocolate, my brain releases dopamine, and I feel pleasure.
Right, that is the widespread cultural misconception.
Yeah.
But dopamine is actually not the pleasure molecule at all. It is the desire molecule.
A desire molecule.
Exactly. It's the motivation molecule. It is the chemical of anticipation and wanting. It's the mechanism that makes you feel driven to go get a reward rather than the feeling you get once you actually consume it.
Oh, wow. Okay, so if I think about that chocolate cake, dopamine isn't the delicious, sweet taste of the cake when I finally eat it.
No, not at all.
Dopamine is the intense craving that gets me off the couch, into my car, and driving to the bakery in the first place.
That captures it perfectly. It is the drive itself. And this is a neurotransmitter that has kept vertebrates, including us, alive and motivated to find food and shelter for like 360 million years.
So it's basically a fundamental survival mechanism.
Precisely. But things get really complicated when this ancient survival mechanism meets the modern world. And this brings in Dr. Anna Lemke's research. She introduces this really helpful concept called the pain and pleasure balance.
I read about that in the sources, and I am trying to picture how that actually looks in the brain. How does the brain balance those two things?
Well, Dr. Lemke uses the analogy of a seesaw. So imagine a seesaw in your brain. On one side is pleasure, and on the other side is pain.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
The brain has a primary goal called homeostasis, which just means it always wants that seesaw to stay perfectly level. It really does not want to be tipped too far in either direction for too long.
But today, we live in a world where we are just constantly pushing down on the pleasure side, right? I mean, we have infinite social media scrolling, hyper-palatable junk food, video games.
Right. Endless, cheap dopamine.
So what happens to the seesaw when we just flood it with those cheap, high dopamine activities all day?
When you press down really hard on the pleasure side with those cheap hits of stimulation, the brain has to fight back to keep its balance. To counteract that heavy weight on the pleasure side, your brain compensates by adding weight to the pain side.
Wait, it adds weight to the pain side?
Yes. At a cellular level, your brain actually downregulates its own dopamine receptors.
What does downregulation mean physically, though? Like, are the receptors actually disappearing?
They are essentially retreating. Your brain realizes it is being flooded with way too much stimulation, so it physically reduces the number of active receptors available to receive dopamine. It intentionally makes itself less sensitive to protect the whole system.
Oh, I see.
So when you suddenly take away the phone and lock it in a drawer, that artificial pleasure weight is just suddenly gone. But your brain still has all that heavy biological weight pushing down on the pain side.
That makes so much sense. It explains why sitting in my room for 12 minutes with no phone didn't feel relaxing at all. It felt like actual physical agony.
Because it was.
My brain was literally stuck on the pain side of the seesaw, just waiting for a massive hit of stimulation that wasn't coming.
Exactly. Your baseline for what feels normal was temporarily altered.
Hmm.
Because your receptors were downregulated, everyday normal activities like looking out a window or trying to start a task on your board, they just don't provide enough stimulation to even register.
They suddenly feel unbearably boring or even uncomfortable.
Yes. So the panic you felt on the bathroom floor was just your brain screaming for balance.
Okay, so if dopamine is just about natural motivation and our brain naturally produces it to keep us alive, why are people isolating themselves, fasting, and locking themselves in dark rooms? I mean, where did this whole idea of a dopamine detox even come from?
Well, the origin of the trend is actually rooted in solid clinical psychology, but it got completely twisted as it spread online. A California psychiatrist named Dr. Cameron Seesaw created a protocol he called Dopamine Fasting 2.0.
Wait, 2.0?
Yeah, he chose that name because he knew it would sound catchy to his clients, who were mostly Silicon Valley tech workers.
Okay, so what was he actually trying to do with these tech workers if it wasn't about sitting in a dark room and staring at a wall?
He was using a really established framework called cognitive behavioral therapy, specifically a technique called stimulus control. Dr. Seesaw was targeting very specific, compulsive behaviors that were causing problems for his patients.
Behaviors like what?
Things like excessive internet use, emotional eating, gambling, or recreational drugs. The goal of his protocol was just to take a structured break from those specific triggers so people could regain control of their habits and let their dopamine receptors naturally reset.
But the internet just took that catchy title and completely ran with it. I mean, I have read about people avoiding eye contact, refusing to listen to music, and sitting in complete silence because they think they are literally detoxing their brain.
Right, it morphed into this form of extreme modern asceticism. People started treating a vital neurotransmitter like it was an unnatural poison that just needed to be flushed out. But biologically, you simply cannot detox from dopamine.
Because it's literally keeping us alive.
Exactly. Your brain needs it for basic motor function and survival.
I have to push back a little on Dr. Sipaw's terminology, though. If he knew that the phrase dopamine detox was scientifically inaccurate, isn't it kind of dangerous to promote that name?
You mean?
Well, using the word detox implies you are toxic. It makes people feel like they have a chemical infection in their brain rather than just a bad habit. It feels like it turns a normal behavioral struggle into a moral failing.
You are definitely not alone in thinking that. Many neuroscientists and psychologists share that exact concern. The terminology is highly problematic.
It just feels so heavy.
It does. Labeling it a detox implies you are poisoned, which makes people feel broken. And when people try these extreme fasts and inevitably fail because the brain will eventually demand stimulation, leading to things like reading a shampoo bottle, they feel immense shame. They think they just lack willpower.
When in reality, the brain is functioning exactly as it was designed to. It is just reacting to a highly engineered digital environment that it was never evolved to handle in the first place.
Precisely. The shame is entirely misplaced. Your biology is working perfectly. It is simply overwhelmed by the environment.
Okay, so if the extreme darkroom detox is a myth, and I obviously cannot just starve my brain of dopamine to fix my focus, how do we actually solve the problem? Because, I mean, the problem is still very real. I am still completely paralyzed by digital distractions.
Right. The symptoms are still there.
Yeah. If the answer isn't locking my phone in a drawer and suffering, what is it?
This is where the insights from James Clear in his book Atomic Habits become incredibly useful. The core issue isn't the dopamine itself. The issue is how cheap, fast, and easy it is to get that dopamine in our modern environment.
Because it's literally always in our pockets.
Exactly. So the solution relies on a concept called the law of friction.
Oh, I love this concept. I find it so fascinating because usually when we try to break a bad habit, we rely entirely on pure willpower. And using willpower feels like standing in the middle of a rushing river trying to push the water back with your bare hands.
That is a great visual.
You might be able to hold the water back for a few minutes, right?
Mhm.
But eventually your arms get tired and the river just rushes right over you anyway.
Yes, because willpower is a heavily taxing mental process. It requires active energy from your prefrontal cortex, which is the logical decision-making part of your brain. And just like a muscle, your prefrontal cortex gets fatigued. You simply cannot rely on it all day long.
So the law of friction is basically about environmental design. If willpower is trying to push the water back with your hands, environmental design is simply building a dam so the water naturally flows in a totally different direction. You don't fight the water, you just change the landscape.
That is a very accurate way to look at it. Instead of staring at your phone on the desk and burning through your mental energy trying not to pick it up, you design your environment to add physical barriers.
Like what kind of barriers?
You use website blockers on your computer that are difficult to disable. You charge your phone in the kitchen instead of next to the bed. You make the bad habit physically or logistically difficult to execute.
You make the cheap dopamine expensive to get. You force yourself to pay for it with time and effort.
Yes. And the reason this works is rooted in how the brain processes decisions. If you have to walk to another room, wait for a device to turn on, and type in a complex password just to check a social media feed, you are introducing a delay.
And that delay is the friction.
Exactly. In that brief pause, the friction gives your prefrontal cortex a few seconds to wake up, evaluate the situation, and ask, wait, do I actually want to do this? Or am I just acting on an automatic impulse?
That makes a lot of sense. Building the dam stops the automatic bad habits by giving the logical brain time to intervene. But here's where I always get stuck with my task board.
The infamous task board.
The infamous task board. I understand how to stop scrolling, but how do I start the good habits without feeling entirely overwhelmed? When I look at a goal like, write a huge report or exercise for an hour, I just freeze.
Because stopping a bad habit and starting a good one actually require totally different approaches.
Yeah.
To start a good habit without triggering that massive feeling of overwhelm, we have to look at the science of self-directed neuroplasticity.
Okay, that sounds incredibly complex. What does self-directed neuroplasticity mean for someone who is just trying to get off the couch?
It simply means you have the ability to physically rewire the pathways in your brain through intentional action. But to do this successfully, you need to bypass the brain's natural resistance to large, intimidating tasks.
And how do we do that?
You need two specific tools from behavioral science. The first is the 2-minute rule.
Wait, so just doing something for 2 minutes, how does that actually help you finish a whole project? It sounds like you are just scaling the habit down until it is ridiculously easy.
That is exactly what you are doing. You scale the new behavior down so it takes 2 minutes or less to complete. If your goal is to read a dense nonfiction book, your 2-minute rule is to read one single page.
Just one page.
Just one. If your goal is to do a full workout, your 2-minute rule is simply to put on your gym shoes and step outside.
I have to be honest, I have always been deeply skeptical of this advice. It feels like cheating. I mean, putting on my gym shoes doesn't burn any calories. Reading one page isn't going to get me through a 400-page book. It just feels like avoiding the real work.
It is entirely natural to feel skeptical about it because logically you are right. Reading one page does not accomplish the larger goal. But this strategy is not about logic. It is about neurobiology.
Okay, walk me through the biology of it.
Your conscious, logical goals live in the prefrontal cortex. But your habits, the behaviors you do completely automatically, are governed by a totally different, older structure in the brain called the basal ganglia.
So the basal ganglia is essentially the automatic pilot system.
Exactly. And the basal ganglia does not care how big, impressive, or logical your goal is. It only understands and responds to repetition. The 2-minute rule works because it attacks the absolute hardest part of any habit, which is the friction of starting.
Getting over that initial hump.
Right. It establishes the neural pathway first. Imagine you are standing at the edge of a very dense, overgrown forest.
Okay, I am picturing trying to walk through it.
The first time you try to walk through that forest, it is exhausting. You are pushing aside heavy branches, stepping over thick roots, fighting through the brush. That is what starting a completely new habit feels like to your brain. It requires massive energy.
It feels terrible.
But if you walk that exact same path every single day, even if you only walk for 2 minutes, you eventually trample down the brush. You clear a trail. Over time, that trail becomes a smooth dirt road. With more repetition, it becomes a paved highway.
Oh, I see. You have to slowly clear the path through the forest first before you can try to run a marathon on it. You have to establish the biological behavior before you can optimize the actual results.
The 2-minute rule is simply clearing the path. Once the pathway is paved in the basal ganglia, lengthening the time you spend doing the habit is relatively easy. But if you try to run a full marathon through a dense, overgrown forest on day 1, the friction is just way too high. You will give up.
That reframes it completely for me. It takes the pressure off the outcome and just focuses on starting the engine. But how do you make sure you actually remember to do the 2-minute habit every day?
That is where the second tool comes in. It's called habit chaining, or sometimes habit stacking. It is a way to ensure the new behavior actually happens. You link the new 2-minute habit to an action that you already do automatically every single day.
Give me an example of how that works in practice, like with morning routines.
Sure. Instead of vaguely saying, I will try to meditate today, you connect it to an established routine. You say, right after I make my bed in the morning, I will sit on the edge of it and meditate for 2 minutes.
So you are using the old automatic habit of making the bed as the trigger for the new habit.
Exactly. Because the brain already knows how to make the bed without thinking about it. You're basically piggybacking on a neural pathway that is already built into a paved highway.
That is so clever.
The basal ganglia naturally flows through the morning routine, and you are just adding one tiny 2-minute link to the end of that established chain. It requires almost zero willpower to execute.
So bringing all of these sources together, what does this actually mean for you, the listener?
I think the biggest realization for me in this deep dive is that feeling paralyzed by distraction does not mean you are weak, and your brain is certainly not broken.
Not at all. Your biology is functioning completely normally. It is simply responding to the inputs it is given.
You do not need to lock yourself in a dark room, stare at a wall, and suffer through a dopamine fast to fix your focus. Or, read shampoo bottles on the bathroom floor.
Please don't do that.
Yeah, skip the soap labels. You just need to understand that your brain is operating on a delicate pain and pleasure seesaw. And once you know that, the whole strategy shifts. We need to design our physical environments to add friction to those cheap, easy distractions.
We have to build the dam. We build the dam. And when it comes to the task board, we use the 2-minute rule to start ridiculously small. We clear the path in the forest before we try to run. We need to be kind to ourselves because behavior change is a slow, biological process, not a test of moral character.
That synthesis hits the core of the research perfectly. And to leave the listener with one final, broader thought to just kind of explore on their own, consider the physical and digital environment we are navigating every single day.
It's intense out there.
It is. The largest technology companies in the world spend billions of dollars and hire thousands of the smartest behavioral engineers to perfectly design an environment that hijacks your dopamine system. They actively want your brain's seesaw tipped heavily toward them.
They are essentially building a smooth, frictionless river that flows right into their apps.
Yes. They are actively designing your environment to benefit their bottom line, not your mental health. So if they're putting that much effort into engineering your attention, what is one tiny 2-minute environmental change you can make today as an act of rebellion?
An act of rebellion. I love that.
What is one small friction point you can build to take your attention back for you?
I really love viewing it that way. Just moving your phone charger across the room or deleting an app from your home screen is literally fighting back against the system. Well, thank you so much for walking through the science of this with me today.
It was a pleasure.
And to our listener, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the mind. Make sure to follow the show so you don't miss our next conversation because we have a lot more coming. Be kind to yourself this week, start ridiculously small, and we will see you next time.